Okay, everyone, this is my spoiler review of X-Men the Animated Series Season 1, Episode 12, Days of Future Past, Part 2. This originally came out March 20th, 1993. Before I jump into this review, please hit that subscribe button. This is a new X-Men channel that's going to be covering everything X-Men, so if you love X-Men, hit that subscribe button. You will not regret it. So what was cool about the opening of this episode, it actually shows you a little bit that happened before the cliffhanger of the previous episode, but from the perspective of what Rogue and Gambit were doing. And we get to learn that Rogue drives stick, and it makes sense how she's talking about how in the South the boys taught her how to drive, and she's from the South, so it all lines up. So I thought that was pretty funny. But where things start to cook from where we left off with Bishop is when he says about Gambit, he's the assassin, he has to be terminated. So that reveal comes now, and you get a good chunk of explanation here from Bishop about what exactly happens. He says it starts with a single death in Washington, D.C. The assassin is Gambit, but all mutants get blamed. And this mutant control law is passed, causing an army of sentinels, and they hunt mutants like animals and bring them to detention camps. We actually see Jean, Cyclops, and Beast really quickly in the glasses of one of the guards, which I thought was a pretty cool shot, but you got to catch it real quick. And they're brought into the camp, and he's like, you never leave, and that they'll die there basically, because we see their tombstones. And he says, but those who control the sentinels don't stop with mutants. Eventually they bring their new world order to all humans. And that's when we'll see the sentinels destroying army tanks, destroying the Capitol building, capturing the president, who we know isn't bad. So you see all this as a result of this one assassination. But I love when Professor X actually asks Bishop, who is Gambit supposed to assassinate? Because as the audience, you're waiting for this answer for a while now, too. And Bishop says, I don't know. I only know it happens soon in Washington. So he conveniently doesn't remember this specific part when it's all kind of making sense to him, because they want to keep the mystery and tension there of who it could possibly be that Gambit assassinates, and it will lead to a line like X literally saying, perhaps he kills me. So it's a little goofy because it all clicks to him except that one part about who actually got assassinated. He just doesn't remember. I love this moment too when Storm goes, Gambit, I know you better than anyone. And then looks at Rogue, and Rogue looks back at her. It's just one of those funny moments shown visually about her saying that. And I love that Storm's the first one to look at Rogue to see her reaction of her saying that. I just thought that was hysterical. But she brings up again this line about we're all capable of evil. Basically, no one's taking Gambit for his word here. Now, this was nicely set up throughout the whole season about Gambit feeling like nobody trusts him, no one believes him. So that gets its payoff here, so I really like that. And he says, don't nobody trust Gambit, then Gambit need nobody. But they don't let him leave because they don't want him doing what causes all this to happen. And everyone comes to an agreement that Gambit and Bishop must stay, but Wolverine's going to be the babysitter, which is great. And of course, they start playing poker together, and Gambit throws a card at Bishop, and Bishop's like, I can absorb your bioenergy and channel it right back. So we didn't actually even get to see this power used or explained in the last episode. It's cool to see it here in this moment. And Wolverine, always with the best lines, goes, how would you like to try absorbing these? Showing his claws. And he's like, now sit down, both of you, or cards won't be the only thing that gets cut around here. Just so good. But Gambit will use his cards eventually, have them blow up, and use it as a distraction, and gets away from Bishop and Wolverine. So we see in Washington, we have this brotherhood of mutants here with Pyro, Avalanche, and it's great to see the Blob again. Last time we saw him was on Slave Island in a small cameo, so it's good to see him actually have a bigger part in this episode. And we get this shadowy figure, which you just know is Mystique right away. And Pyro even has the line, lovely day for an assassination. I almost wish they didn't even throw that line in. Add a little more mystery to it, even though you can kind of put two together the ones who are going to do this. But I really wish they didn't even show Mystique yet, because you could take from that shadowy figure it is Mystique, of course, and that means, of course, you put two and two together that moment that she was posing as Gambit. But I love the Blob burps here during this, and we'll get another burp later on when Jubilee shoots him. And I also love the Blob because he's such a humorous character to add into anything, so he only elevates the content. And I love that we see him outside at the rally, and he has this Hawaiian shirt that's just ripping off of him. Now, when this showdown begins where the X-Men fight this Brotherhood of Mutants right after Robert Kelly was ripping into Professor X, and Professor X calls for help because they showed up to assassinate Robert Kelly, that Wolverine throws Blob into the pool, Storm freezes him. So the action is really good between the mutants here. And there's a great moment in the action where Bishop gets hit by Avalanche, absorbs his power, shoots it back, but it hits a building, almost kills a bunch of people, but then Jean holds up the building and Rogue grabs it before it falls on the girl, and Wolverine grabs the girl. Love that sequence. That's like the best way you can do superhero type sequences in these kinds of scenes. And there's some cool stuff here too, like Cyclops when he hits his X button to communicate to Rogue. Rogue is actually getting Cyclops blinking on her X button, which is on her belt. So it's the first time we see her belt being used that way. So that was really cool. And she has this great line while she's watching Bishop from overhead. She's like, I would spit on him if I wasn't a lady. Looks like he's running for Congress. What a pun. So we get the big reveal that you knew was coming, that Mystique posed as Gambit for the assassination of Robert Kelly to frame it on Gambit and the X-Men. And the real Gambit comes in and he has a great line and says, surprised to see me? I know I am. But Bishop shows up now, shoots the real Gambit, which is important. So he just falls, and that's where we're going to leave him off base in the episode, because later on we'll see that Rogue left him there with the pillow, and that's where Wolverine has a great line. He's like, what is he, taking a nap? So that's kind of like the end of the story here for the real Gambit, but Bishop's like, maybe take you both out just to be sure, talking about the two Gambits, and he says at full force, but this is where Rogue comes in, who's a perfect person to come in to save Gambit, but she also really saves Mystique here, which is the perfect person for that, so we can get this big reveal. That's really the big thing that hits hard in this episode. And we see Rogue takes off Bishop's temporal transceiver and sends him back to the future. And Mystique says to Rogue, you won't hurt me, Rogue, because you're going to help me escape. And Rogue says, why would I do a crazy thing like that? And she says, because once I looked like this, reveals herself to be her adoptive mother. And she's like, Mama, so what's crazy about this is this moment Rogue's also learning that this whole time her adoptive mother was Mystique. She only had seen her in the form as her mom. That's why she didn't recognize Mystique in the Muir Island episode. And you see Mystique's like, that's what I told you to call me when I took you in, what you called me into the day you ran away. And she says, are you going to help me the way I once helped you? So this is good writing. This is really important. This is why Rogue helps her escape that mama effect now. She's putting that guilt on her daughter. That's going to mess with Rogue and her job as an X-Man and that conflict of having now Mystique being family. And Rogue takes Mystique away. And she says, okay, Mama, we are safe now. And she says, you may be, but I have failed Apocalypse. He wanted Kelly assassinated to assure the human race what it deserves. And that's where Rogue's like, just leave him. And Mystique's like, he made me what I am, gave me purpose. And she shapeshifts at this moment to her true form, which I thought was cool how they did that. And she says, just like Professor X did with you. But that's where Rogue's like, it's not the same thing. And she's like, why did you try making me a slave for Apocalypse? And this is where Mystique's like, seems like the only way I can get you back. And then Rogue cries. And there's a nice animation of her hair blowing in the wind. I really like this. This is just like a great type of anime scene you'd see, which is just nice to see in an X-Men show like this. So I thought that was a great moment. And Rogue's story, just in this whole season, has really stood out as one of the best. Now, Bishop gets back to the future. Nothing has changed. And Forge is like, you can try again and again once the machine is rebuilt. But Bishop's like, well, I didn't fail though, so why are things the same? But he says something else must have happened afterwards. And we'll see in the regular timeline, Kelly has been taken and Professor X, his watch has stopped. And he's like, it's been magnetized. So we know Magneto is going to come back in the big finale, which makes me so excited. Great cliffhanger. But I also mentioned something that's really cool too, is when Forge is talking to Bishop there at the end, there looks like a skeleton of Wolverine in water. So I want to know what's up with that. That's really cool. Anything like that even in a show like this throws in is always fascinating. But overall, I really preferred part 1 a lot more than part 2. Part 1 was super focused, had really good pace to it. And this episode felt a little all over the place, and it had that rushing feeling, which again, this show's going to be more prone to because they're only 20-minute episodes. They are kid shows. They have such a short amount of time to spare, but it just felt like though this episode was inferior because of how good the previous episode was and seeing how good this show can get in an episode like the previous one, where this one, it kind of lost that feeling of dread that the first episode did really well. And like I said, the focus of the storyline, a nice smooth rhythm, where this one was kind of chaotic in ways that the action was really good, but I feel like the story suffered a bit. So for me, this episode I'm going to give an 8.2. I still thought it was solid, but I almost wish it even had a better bow for the story of Days of Future Past in this show, because it did feel obligated to set up that finale. So it was maybe something you wish they started earlier in the season so they didn't have to feel that way to get the Magneto finale set up in this episode. But either way, still a really good episode. I'm giving it an 8.2. Let me know what you thought of this episode down below. I love to hear your thoughts. I read every comment. I try to respond as many as I can. And please subscribe. This is a brand new channel. It helps in so many ways. If you can subscribe if you're a huge X-Men fan. And I'll see you next time.